Hello. In this video, I would explain the HLA DR test to you. Is my body able to detox from biotoxins such as mold toxin? Or do I have the HLA DR gene variant, which would mean that my normal detoxification organs, such as the liver and kidneys, cannot very well detox mycotoxins from my body? The HLA DR test gives us the answer. In fact, there is only one way to know if you have mycotoxins in your body, and that is to do the urine mycotoxin test. In order to do this test, you have to order a test kit from an American laboratory and send it back via FedEx to the United States. The only problem is that this test is relatively expensive. Even if the price includes the return shipment via FedEx, the total cost of the test is about $330, plus about $100 for international shipping. Therefore, it makes sense to do a few screening tests first to get an indication of whether it is likely or not that you have mycotoxins in your body. There are two main screening tests that can give an indication. Firstly, there is the VCS test. You can do this test online because it's a visual test, and it costs about $15. I have already made a video about this test on my channel, and I will copy the link in the description of this video. And the other test is, of course, the HLA DR test. In many countries, this test is paid by health insurance if a doctor gives you a prescription for this test. If you have to pay for it on your own, it can be very expensive. I think it might cost around $700 to $800 or maybe even more. So what is exactly the HLA DR test? This test tells you whether you have a gene variant, which means it's not a gene defect, but just a variant, and more precisely, whether you can break down mycotoxins and detox them via the liver. About 24% of the population cannot do this because of this gene variant, and they then accumulate mold toxins in their bodies throughout their whole life. This means, of course, that it's much more likely that they have accumulated mycotoxins in their bodies and they got sick from that with mold illness. However, if you have the HLA-DR gene and you are not good at detoxing mycotoxins, you can still do that with medication. Of course, the HLA-DR test only gives an indication of whether mold poisoning is likely. It's not a test that would determine whether mold poisoning is actually present in your body. Of course, you have to do the mycotoxin test itself to test for that. Nevertheless, the HLA-DR test is very useful because if it is positive, then you know that you must strictly avoid any exposure to mold in the future. Exposure means exposing yourself to mold and mycotoxins in a moldy home, car, in a moldy workplace or hotel. So it's a bit like a dust allergy where you have to be very careful not to have any dust in your home. If you get a positive result from this HLA-DR test, then you have to just avoid mold and thus mycotoxins. If in addition to a positive HLA-DR test, the VCS test is also positive, then it obviously makes sense to do the mycotoxin test in urine, even if it is not really cheap. The HLA-DR test is often done before an organ donation because it somehow provides information about how the new organs integrate into the body and whether they are rejected by the immune system. So, if you want to do the HLA-DR test, you might be asked which organ you are going to receive. Of course, you have to explain that this is about something else, namely about the body's ability to detoxify biotoxins. I myself have had to explain this several times because this topic is still largely unknown. Oftentimes, the HLA-DR test is done by blood donation services of the Red Cross and, of course, the laboratories in the hospitals that perform organ transplantations. For some genetic tests, the patient has to sign a consent form for the genetic test, so it might be a good idea to sign this form right away and send it to the laboratory as well, so the test can be done. By the way, once the blood has been taken from the patient and went into the blood tubes, I have been told that the samples will last forever, so there is no need to hurry to send it to the lab. When you get the results, these are codes that you then have to convert into a readable result. To do this, you can use an online calculator on the internet, where you enter the values and then it gives you the result. I will put a link here in the description of this video for this online calculator. But in order to feed this online calculator accurately, you need the very specific references for the lab results. And therefore, they should also be in the doctor's prescription, because that makes sure that you get the right references to be fed into the calculator. If the HLA-DR test is positive, then it means that you need to strictly avoid exposure to mold and thus to mycotoxins. Mold is often hidden and not visible. It often happens after a small and hence invisible water damage in homes, workplaces, hotels, and even in cars. Cars tend to get moldy carpets and other interiors like upholstery, etc. Oftentimes, people with mold illness go to a hotel and end up with a serious breakdown because mold is often hidden behind paneling or building materials or even under new paint. And it happens that hotel rooms are often renovated, so they seem very clean, but in reality, there is mold hidden somewhere in that hotel room. And that leads sometimes to severe breakdowns for persons with mold illness. If the HLA-DR test is positive, then of course a test for mycotoxins in the urine makes a lot of sense. Because if you can't detoxify mycotoxins, it's very likely that you have already accumulated some of them in your life. That's why you should test for that. And if necessary, detoxify from the mycotoxins. If in addition to a positive HLA-DR test, you have other symptoms of mold poisoning, then I think you should really do the urine test for mycotoxins. If you are a bad detoxer, you can still detox with binders. They will bring the mycotoxins out of your body. There are, of course, various types of binders. That is a separate topic, and I will make another video about that. And of course, knowing your HLA-DR status is interesting because then you might also better understand your own history. If you are HLA-DR positive, then you accumulate those mycotoxins since birth. And oftentimes when people are 10, 12, or 14 years old, they then start to develop some kind of health problem, which nobody is able to explain at that time. For instance, that might be digestive problems or psychological instabilities. And if you now find out that you have this gene variant and that you have perhaps accumulated mycotoxins since birth, then that might explain the medical history of the patient. This, of course, means that you can deal much better with it, because in the future you can avoid exposure or get toxins out of your body with binders. And in most cases, the person will feel much better. If the HLA-DR test is negative, meaning if you do not have this gene variant, and you can indeed detox biotoxins and mold toxins from your body, then maybe you don't need to do the expense of the urine mycotoxin test. At least if you do not have any other symptoms. Nevertheless, someone who is HLA-DR negative, that means who detoxes well, can become very ill from mycotoxins if he lives in a house that is infested with mold. So even normal people can become very, very ill if they are exposed to a lot of mycotoxins. So if there are other symptoms for mold illness, then maybe someone with a negative HLA-DR should do the urine mycotoxin test just to be sure. The same applies if someone has, for instance, chronic diseases, because mycotoxins cause a permanent state of inflammation, which in turn can cause chronic diseases. So even with a negative HLA-DR, it can make sense to do the mycotoxin test. If you have already done a urine mycotoxin test and have a positive result, meaning you have mold toxins in your body, it still makes sense to do the HLA-DR test. Because if it's positive, then you know that you should avoid exposure in the future. I hope you enjoyed the video and found that the explanations were useful to you. If that is the case, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon in another video on the topic of mold toxins and SIBO. If you have any questions, please go to my website, scroll down and book a free coaching call by clicking on the orange button. Also, please be aware that I'm not a medical doctor or any other health professional, and I'm just giving you some information, tips and personal opinion that you should speak about with your doctor and see if it fits your personal situation and if you can use those tips.